place down in Stourbridge, and man with the roving mic is Dave Brownhill, who'll be bringing us all the news and information after midnight tonight. But in the meantime, let's go to our panel, or what exists of it at the moment. We're still waiting for Les Jones to join us. Our panel tonight, Dave Tyler, who's standing down as a councillor this time round, Ian Marrey, who's supposed to be here but has decided to sit at home and enjoy the comfort of his living room, and Eve Bennett, of course, with me in the studio. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. How you doing?
Dave, a bit of a strange one for you. First time not standing for a while.
Well, it is, but it has to come sometime, doesn't it? And it's nice to go under your own steam and the voters say we don't want you.
What made your decision? Why did you decide that enough was enough?
Yeah, I'm 74 now, and it's a 4-year term. And I think 74, there's still a lot of things that need doing in my own personal life. So it's time to have a break and have a few holidays, I think.
What I was going to ask, what you enjoyed about it. I will come to that in due course, because I mean there's lots of stuff you've done, and it must have been a huge privilege to be mayor for a start. But what do you feel, I suppose, is the Dave Tyler legacy?
I think if anybody is truthful, when they want to get elected, the first thing they do is they just want to be represent the people that put them in there in the first place. I never set out with any aspirations to achieve anything. I just rolled with it when it came along. All I ever wanted to do was to be a public servant. I mean, I was a public servant as a policeman for 30 odd years, and it just seemed a natural progression for me to keep putting back into the community.
And how do you think things have improved or otherwise in the time you've been a councillor?
Well, I think things have changed, and this is changed everything, the communications, because I remember when I first joined, we didn't even have laptops, we didn't have computers. Everything was done by folks knocking on the door, and you had more interaction with physical interaction with members of the public. And it's all done via text and Skype and Teams and Zoom. And it's totally different to how it was 21 years ago.
I guess that's helped, particularly during the pandemic, where you've not been able to have face-to-face conversations.
It's been a boon, to be quite honest. I mean, I was lucky enough, I was still chair of the Health and Adult Social Care Committee, and I asked in March, when we knew that we were going to go into lockdown, if we could start scrutinising Dudley and the partners' response to the pandemic. And we were the first, if not one of the first, councils in the country to start a scrutiny process. I couldn't see the point in waiting until it was all done and dusted, and because you scrutinise on a daily basis anyway.
Mm-hmm. And have you sort of found that, you know, it's been easy to interact with the people of the Black Country, because, you know, they can be a fussy old lot sometimes, can't they?
No, we're good as gold.
Is the correct answer.
The only difficult people are all supporters sometimes, because there's one sitting opposite me. And that's a joke, because he's going to have a go at me, you see.
But you've enjoyed your time, and you feel as though you've achieved what you wanted to achieve while you've been doing that.
Absolutely loved representing the people of Kingswinford North and Warleith. I couldn't have been in a better place, and I couldn't have asked for better people to be working with. Okay,
well, we'll talk a bit more about what you've been up to over the last few years in a little while, but I want to bring Ian in here, because Ian, I just want to sort of wrap of where we are with what's happening today. Only a third, I think, of the seats are up for election this time round. Is that correct?
Yeah, so these are the elections that were delayed from last May. There's a couple of wards where I think there's 2 seats up for election, but we're within that third rotation.
And how do you think that's worked? Do you think it's captured people's imagination, given that it's the first time that people have had to vote since Boris Johnson got in back in 18 months ago, whenever it was?
It's difficult to tell. I mean, I've been doing the show on Black Country Radio since 2015, and we've had referendum, election, referendum, election, and all the local election in between that. We seem to have been doing nothing in this country but some version of politics now since 2015. And I think that the referendum sort of, it engaged people in a way, in politics in a way that hadn't really happened before, on both sides. But I've not seen any evidence really that that's followed through. I'm not convinced we're going to have a high turnout on this election. I think it will be back down where we've seen it in local elections pretty much for the last 15, 20 years. 25, 30% will be a good turnout.
Postal vote, do you think that's going to sort of add to perhaps what we might have expected? Because it seems to me that a lot more people are going down that particular path.
I spoke to the chief exec of Dudley Council last week, and postal votes certainly have gone up. I think he said they're about 30% up on last time. So it'll be interesting to see whether that is just replacing who would have gone to turn up and vote at the polling stations, or whether it does see an uptick. But I think, and Dave alluded to this, politics used to be about knocking on doors and talking to people. And it has been harder this time. There's no doubt about it. It's only really the last few weeks that politicians will have been able to get out. And a good politician, a good community councillor, would have been out talking to residents every single week, 52 weeks of the year.
I was talking a little earlier with Eve about the fact that you perhaps got a different demographics voting for different parties for different reasons. Do you think that might be the case? Do you perhaps see young voters perhaps putting out protest votes, whereas the older you are, perhaps, and perhaps the more inoculated you are, the more likely you might be voting blue?
Yeah, there was a time when I think politics was fairly predictable. You had the sitting government, and a couple of years into that government, if you had local elections, you would expect to see the opposition parties on the rise. My sort of introduction to local politics was 2012. I was standing as a paper candidate at the time because they needed somebody at short notice, and I went away and won it. But that was in the face of being an opposition party councillor in 2012, when at the time the Labour Party pretty much ripped up the form book and took seat after seat after seat. But since then, it's been going the other way, and now we're sort of 50-50 on Dudley Council in 2019. But I don't think politics is predictable anymore. I think that you go to nobody expected the 2017 result. You go back to 2015, and most people would have called that going to be a hung parliament, with possibly Labour Party as being the largest party. David Cameron ends up with a majority. And, I think even the most optimistic Conservative will have been surprised by what happened in 2019, when Boris Johnson gets, a huge majority. Since then, I don't think enough has happened. And I say that there's been a global pandemic and the Black Lives Matter, and there's been a whole load of really important things happen, but actually nothing's happened since then. I don't think that people will give up much on their vote from 2019. And I don't think the Labour Party have done enough nationally in opposition. They haven't had the platform in many respects to really cut through to voters. I personally think we're going to see a repeat of 2019 shown in the local elections in Dudley, where the Labour Party suffered badly in Dudley. In the north of the country, I think we're going to see the Conservative vote hang up. Across the Midlands, I think, again, the Conservative vote will stand up very well, possibly even increase with the vaccine bounce on top of that.
I'm just wondering, Eve, I mean, I've done many a show with overnight show with Ian in the past, and it's been a situation where the exit voters come out, the results come out, and we've sort of thought, oh, it's going to be a hung parliament, and perhaps we're going to be like this going into the future. And then 2019 happened, and it was like, what? Boris taking over the country. Did it surprise you the way 2019 went the way that it did?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I really don't think anybody was expecting. I think people were expecting a better result than what Theresa May managed in 2017, but I don't think people were expecting the scale of the majority that he got. I would be tempted to say that we could perhaps have a similar situation this evening where we're a bit like, oh, which way is it going to go? And then we might be surprised either way. I'm not going to say which way, that could be. But as Ian said, politics is anything but predictable these days. And as I was saying, ever since the Brexit referendum, it really has, the days of when you could kind of guess which way things were going to swing, judging by just the natural fluctuations of opposition and then, back and forth from the local to the main election. I just don't think we can do that anymore. And as Ian said as well, the pandemic has changed the opposition's ability to be in opposition. They've not been able to get out there and get the platform that they would normally have because they've had to back the government on a lot of things, because during a national crisis is probably not the time to not be backing the government on certain decisions, if that makes sense. So yeah, it'd be very interesting.
Let's bring in Les Jones. Good evening, Les. Hello.
Good evening. Sorry.
Good evening.
I have to find my microphone in the corner.
But we can see. Nice of you to hang up your laundry for us. Nice.
That is actually, if I was sitting in the other seat, that would actually be the TARDIS, but it's not because I'm in a different position.
I was going to say Eve might need that to take with her to Spain to go and lie on the beach, so she might be popping round for it later. Anyway, it's nice to see you, both you and Dave, and thank you both for joining us. Les, you're also not standing this time as well. What's your overriding reasons why that's the case?
I think I've done enough. I've spent 22 years on the council. I fought numerous elections outside of the council, and there comes a point where you have to decide. I got involved in politics, 38 years ago now, good grief. And I did it because I wanted to change the world, as in my view, a lot of people do when they get involved in politics. And I'm proud of the achievements I've made, but you get to a point where you have to accept that it's time for somebody else to take up that particular challenge. And that was my decision. I've also sadly seen a lot of councillors stay in the role because they believe they're doing something good for their community, but have actually lost the ability to be driven to make change. And I think politics is all about change, whether it be in one direction or another. It is all about change. And I think it's quite important that when you lose the motivation to make that change, you really should stand aside and let somebody who wants to do it.
What do you think you've achieved over the last umpteen years that you've been a councillor, or how do you look back on things?
Well, I'm proud of what I've done. One of the things that I'd like to be remembered for in the local political scene is always being willing to say what I believe, rather than simply what the party particular motivation is at any particular time in the electoral cycle. I like to believe that I've spoken my mind, and people like to use the term spoke truth to power. I've always tried to do that, whoever happens to be in power, sometimes not always to the favour of the party I represent, but also when in opposition. I think it's quite important that you are true to yourself, no matter how committed you are to the party that you stand for. And I could list a whole bunch of achievements that fall under my gamut over the years. But what I will say, one of the things I want to say most is, everybody who gets elected, a lot of people tonight will be elected for the first time. They'll believe they can change everything. Over the next 3 or 4 years, they're going to realise that their targets were probably a little bit too high. You start to satisfy yourself with much smaller achievements, but achievements that make a difference, they'll be there forever. I'll give you one very tiny example. Many years ago, an elderly lady was mugged in one of the subways in Stourbridge. I decided that we were going to put a crossing on the ring road to make sure that people who felt uncomfortable in the subways could cross the ring road into the town without that fear. I got that done, and the headline in the paper was £147,000 worth of taxpayers' money wasted on unnecessary crossing. I watch the thousands of people who use that crossing now every week and feel very proud that I got that put there so they didn't have to use the subways. You just change your perspective, because what actually matters is what you deliver to people, not what you aspire to deliver.
Dave, what makes a good councillor?
Well, you've got to be prepared to listen for a starter. That's important. And I agree with Les 100%, because you've got to stay true to yourself. And Les is renowned for staying quiet at the back of the council chamber and all of a sudden weighing in with some honest common sense towards the end of a debate. And that's what you get with Les. And that'll be missed. That'll be missed. Because you need elder statesmen like Les and perhaps myself and others who've come to the end of their time on the council. You lose that experience, but of course the youngsters coming in will gain that experience over the next 4, 8, 12 years, whatever time they do, but it's not going to come overnight. But you need this change. You need to keep this churn of community councillors coming through, because the community is changing and you need the people that represent them to change to mirror the community.
Les, how important is honesty?
Oh, it's fundamental. I was going to say what Dave just said makes me smile in a way. I think you were elected in '99 as well, were you, Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were both elected in the same year. I suspect for the following 3 or 4 years, we probably hated each other, because we're all driven to do something. We're all driven to get our message across. Then over time, when you're sitting in committees, not in the council chamber where you can have a good old raucous debate, but when you're sitting in committees and you try to actually get stuff done, you start to respect the perspective of other people. And there were many occasions where I absolutely fundamentally disagreed with everything somebody stood for. And then we sat in committee and agreed wholeheartedly about the right way to approach something. And this is what you develop in politics. Sadly, the public rarely see that. They only see the rough and tumble. They only see the confrontation. But in reality, in committees, we can often agree. We might end up voting by party lines sometimes, but there'll be members on both sides who all wish we hadn't, because actually we are all driven by the same motivation, which is to do the best we can for the people we represent, even if we fundamentally disagree about what that is.
Thank you to those who've got in touch via the Facebook Live feed so far. Just want to read one or two out. Claire Wharton, good evening to you. She says, I voted, but to be honest, wasn't sure which way to go, has not heard anything from any candidates at all. On that point, Dave, do you think it's been difficult for anyone standing this time to get their message across?
Well, it has been difficult. The COVID pandemic has made life difficult, never mind just elections, for the last 12 months, and people have found it extremely difficult to carry on with any kind of normality. It has been difficult for the candidates, but you get this every election. Some people expect all of the candidates to knock on their door and to give them chapter and verse on the manifesto that they're standing on. Well, in the real world, that's never ever going to happen, because first of all, you'd have to find out what time the people were in the house. You'd have to turn up exactly as per time arranged, and you'd have to have this half an hour long chat with every person. There isn't enough hours in the day, there's not enough time in the week. So you're going to miss out on a lot of people. But you get your leaflets out and you've got social media to communicate with. Unfortunately, social media becomes to some people, social media becomes the equivalent of putting their forehead on yours and giving you a challenge.
Mhm.
You know, gone are the old days where you could stand 3 feet apart and have a good discussion. It's virtually nose to nose with folks and they're shouting at you, because it's almost a capital letter shout sometimes on social media, and you can get dragged into that. And I advise people not to get involved in an argument on social media, because you'll never win.
Do you agree with that, Les? I know you use social media a lot. Is it a case now that it has its benefits but also its faults as well?
Oh, I personally love social media, and I go out of my way to be infinitely reasonable with people who are being completely obnoxious. Partly because I think one of the things about social media is you shouldn't just look at the person who's shouting at you. You have to look at all the other people who are watching that conversation. And sometimes reasonableness wins. And my tendency is that when people get completely irrational, is to just stop there, because people will then look back at the conversation that was had and decide who was being reasonable. And I think that's quite important. But what Dave said is absolutely right. It's been a nightmare for candidates. We often try to draw the opposition into putting a lot more resource into the wards that would normally be seen to be their safe wards, by stirring them up a bit, by rushing in there and having a big blitz and making it look like we're trying to win that ward. When in reality, what we're trying to do is get them out of the wards that are marginal. And these sort of things are the games we play in politics. It's all perfectly reasonable and perfectly fair. But the reality is, this year, we haven't been able to do any of that. It has been a battle on social media and through leaflets. And I want to absolutely agree with Dave on one very specific point. You cannot visit everybody. If you're fighting a ward, you're looking at roughly 5,000 households, 5,000 doors to knock in a period of 3 or 4 weeks. And then the argument comes, oh, well, you're not, you know, we don't see you for the rest of the year. Well, the people who are standing for election have got their lives to live. And they're fighting an election in the hope that they can become a representative, not in the knowledge that they will be. And consequently, they have to focus all their energy into that small window of time. It is one of the frustrations of politics, but it's also part of the pleasure of it. When you win, you feel like you've been chosen by the electorate. The reality is, the politicians, the political machinery goes on like that all the time. Sorry, Dave, do you want to interject? Do, because I could talk about these subjects all night.
Let me just bring in Eve at this point. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, there's just been a message in on Facebook from Glenn Flurry, who said that he voted for his local councillor because he does the most for his community. And so that's an example of a voter that is looking at the councillors individually and is voting based on what they think that the councillor is doing. We were talking earlier whether perhaps, as you were saying, the fact that the election has been on social media and that the candidates haven't had as much direct contact with the people in their wards. Do you think that will influence how much people are looking at what individual councillors have done for their local community, or whether people are just going to be voting based on the national picture this time?
Gents?
Well,
I'll come in there, Eve. I think it's been extremely difficult this year, as we've all said, but people shouldn't be swayed by the 4 weeks of litter picks, because that's not what being a councillor is all about. It's the 50 odd weeks a year and minus holidays that the councillor is door knocking, is delivering leaflets, is talking to people, getting work done that you never ever see as members of the public. Councillors will be doing work every day, every week, that the vast majority of people will never even know that the council's been doing. I mean, Leslie's probably done this as well. I'm in the last month of my tenure as a councillor, I've still had people ringing me up and emailing me and texting me saying, can you do this? Can you do this? but there's no change in what you do because it's just part of the job. You just carry on doing it. I've had a job today, the very last day I'm a counsellor, and I've had to email officers today and then explain to the person, of course, I won't be here when you ask tomorrow.
Well, I was going to make a point that I think both of you have already had your email addresses for the council deleted already, which is why Les was a little bit late joining us because he hadn't got the link to actually join us on air.
No, I think the bailiffs are coming in on Sunday.
Les, have you not been paying your broadband again?
I don't know what happened because initially I was told that it would be cut off on the 12th of the month.
Yeah.
But then, in fact, my password was cancelled today. I don't know why that is, but there you go.
But just going back to the point where Ian was making, I'll bring Ian in here. You know, a lot of us will be at home, and the only thing that we'll really know about an election going on is when the flyers come in through the door or social media. Now, are we getting to the point now where we're, you know, flyers are a waste of time because people are just ditching them and sticking them straight in the bin without seeing what they have to say, and perhaps just relying too much on social media now?
I think for a start that the election leaflets put out do contribute to Dudley Council's recycling income. So yes, they are all going into recycling, I hope. But I mean, I've kept an eye on some of the local social media campaigning that's been going on. Some of it has been quite appalling, in my opinion. I think that there are certain people who, after this election, may need to reflect on their behaviour on social media. It's too easy to get into those, and Les alluded to this. You know, you don't just look at the person who's shouting, but often it's the person who's shouting who's getting all the attention. And I think that there has been, you know, campaigning, and I use that word loosely, that you would never have seen on the streets. You wouldn't see it. I've had a few occasional words with opposition canvassers as we've gone around the street, but it's light-hearted. But the stuff that happens on social media that frankly I think is wrong, and it's something that's crept into our politics quite a lot over the last few years, and we've all laughed at Donald Trump and, you know, his use of social media. But you know, we're not blameless over here either. But I think that when it comes to how are people going to vote, I think the personal vote, in my opinion, is overrated. There's very few councillors who will win alone on recognition. There are some. Another one standing down today, Brian Cottrell in Quarrybank and Dudley Wood. I've walked around Quarrybank and Dudley Wood with Brian Cottrell, and he knows everybody by name. And that's because basically, as a councillor, Brian has only ever been a community councillor. I would reckon that Les and Dave are quite well known in their local area because of the things that they do and the things that they're involved in. But for many, they're not known. They're just a name on a piece of paper, and the vote will be given based on party or issues of the day. And you can see what the Labour Party have been trying to do over the last 2 or 3 weeks. They're trying to cut through into the Conservative vote with the accusations of sleaze. I don't think it's going to have any impact. I think it's, you look at John Major's government, John Major in 1992, when he beat Neil Kinnock. John Major's government between 1992 and 1997 suffered, but it was a slow, gradual decline to 1997 and Labour's landslide. I think even going back to that point, voters, they're aware of this, but being blunt, and maybe Dave and Les will have some experience of this. I certainly did. Many people think we're all the same. That all politicians, whether you're MPs or councillors, you've all got your hands in the little brown envelopes. You're all behest to whatever big business trade. You're all corrupt. That's what people think. So when you start saying, you know, oh, Boris Johnson this and sleaze that contract, people say, yeah, and.
But isn't the case that it's always been like that to a certain extent? I mean, Ian's referring back to 1992 then. and there was a lot of sort of bad words between the major camp and the Kinnock camp back in those days. But it's almost like social media means that it's got more personal now.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that actually. Ian, it was really interesting. You said that social media is more personal, and in that sense, it can lead to more hostility, more sort of direct nose-to-nose arguments, as you guys are talking about. But on the other side of the coin, Craig Lees has just asked, does anyone know what the Libertarian Party was? And that kind of brings me onto the topic of the sort of smaller parties that are standing for the elections, and perhaps, you know, when it comes to sort of mainstream media coverage and the traditional way of doing things in elections, the two main parties kind of dominate that scene. Do you think on the flip side that social media has perhaps been more helpful for those smaller candidates to help get their message and platform across?
I'll say to that is see how many votes they get, because for a party like the Libertarian Party, I don't think they will. I don't think that there's a couple standing for the Libertarian Party in Dudley. Most people don't know who they are, what they stand for. They don't have the platform that UKIP had in 2013, 2014 in the European elections. Single issue where they were swept to election success on the back of a swell of support around a single issue. Everybody knew what UKIP stood for. It was clear as day. I think in the past, when we look at smaller parties, the Liberal Democrats have often benefited from being not Labour or Conservative. And, you know, I talked about predictability in politics in the past, is that an unpopular government or a midterm government would often see votes that would perhaps go into that government in the general election, go into the Liberal Democrats, and the Liberal Democrats' fortunes would go up. And that had then the knock-on effect of potentially helping the Labour Party. You look at the Greens, they've had breakthroughs across the country. They've got, you know, a number of councillors in the Midlands, but their votes sort of like ticks along at that nationally 5-6%, and that's all they can do in the current electoral system. Many people feel that it is a wasted vote. I've spoken to some of the Green candidates over the last few weeks, you know, and their message is it's not a wasted vote. If you want Green, vote Green. If you want a Liberal Democrat council, you vote Liberal Democrats. But in a first past the post system, unless you are a small party with a chance of winning, then they're not going to attract those floating voters.
Dave, you were mayor for a year. You had that honour. In fact, I just want to go back to a message that we had from Claire a little bit earlier. She said it was a pleasure to have met you, especially at the Dementia Awareness Day in Halsowen for the Salim Foundation. She wishes you well for your future plans. I mean, the charity work, the bits and pieces that you've done, I mean, you must be so proud to and so honoured to have had that position for a period of time.
Yeah, it's a great honour to be made mayor, and you can't underestimate the value that you can put back into the community just by being the mayor. When I became mayor, I really wanted to make it a different mayoralty, a different year, because there's a danger that it becomes the same as every year. So, and I was aware that the business community really, we hadn't really tapped into the business community as a local authority through the mayoralty. Now you can do it because it's a non-political post. So I set out to meet and to visit 100 businesses in a year. And everybody laughed really, because they thought, oh, that's 2 weeks, that's hard graft that. And I finished up visiting 117. Now that really was really well appreciated by the small businesses, because in a lot of the cases they said to me, nobody's ever spoken to us before from the council. And so if that's helped the business people, because they employ our people anyway, if that's helped to recognise the businesses in the borough, then that's fine. And of course, raising almost 60 grand on top of that is a massive bonus.
I had a message from Craig who says, pity we can't have a blind election where people can't see the party the person represents, but actually vote for the person itself rather than the party. I'm sure that there's a lot of councillors who have served over the years. It doesn't matter what party they were represented. They were like for who they were as individuals rather than necessarily the party they're representing.
Well, I'll tell you the honest truth. When I first put up for election, people stopped me in the street because I was born in Blaze Park in Wallheath, and people in Blaze Park, a lot of folks said, "We voted for you, Dad, because we knew your mum and dad." and I'll take that all day. Thank you very much. That gives you a thumping majority.
And do you find that as well, Les, that people sort of know who you are and don't really care what party you represent, but know that you're a safe pair of hands and that they'll entrust you with their vote?
I think I'd probably go further than that and say that elections are there to be lost by the incumbent unless there is a major national swing. I think a good councillor will be able to retain their seat as long as they are doing their job, as long as they are working for the community, unless there is a major national swing. And if you look at Dudley, it's probably a good example of that. There are many, many councillors, myself and Dave included, who've been in our job for many, many years. Not all of those seats are what you would consider to be safe Labour seats or safe Conservative seats. In my case, it is. I mean, I'm not going to deny that I'm in probably the second safest seat in the borough from a Conservative point of view. But the reality is that councillors lose their seats unless there is a major national shift because they aren't getting out there and meeting people. The incumbency is a real thing, particularly at local council level, more so than at national level. And I've listened to what Dave said. I just want to make a point actually about what Dave said about being business orientated. I've been on the council 22 years, and in that time, there are 2 councillors who made it a mission to engage with the business community. And that was Dave, and the other one was Malcolm Knowles, who was famous for wearing his bowler hat to everything he went to. And it actually elevated the position of mayor because it was like a trademark. And I think every mayor has their own trademark. And in all 22 years that I've been on the council, I will honestly say there have been, every mayor has risen to the challenge of the mayoralty. Now, I never wanted to be mayor because I'm at heart a politician and I like the cut and thrust of politics. And the idea of sitting in that chair at council meetings and not being able to chip in and have a go at whoever's saying something I don't agree with was never on my agenda. But the reality is I've supported every mayor we've had because I agree with Dave, just attending charities, community groups, litter pickers, you name it. You turn up at their events as the mayor and you see the pride well up in them because it's probably the only time they'll ever be acknowledged by the establishment for what they do. And I think that is one of the priceless things about having mayors at local level who don't have any power as such. They have the power to control council meetings, but outside of that, it's a ceremonial duty. It's something where the council is acknowledging the work of the community around them. And I absolutely admire everyone who has been mayor in my time on the council. I'm just sad to say that I was never up to that job.
Yeah.
I remember going to one, just very briefly, one event, and the lady had never been, she'd never met a mayor. She'd never been involved in anything like this. And this poor lady was shaking like a leaf. She couldn't hold a piece of paper still in front of her. She was going to make a bit of a speech. And the words just wouldn't come out. So I just moved one step sideways towards her, put my arm round her, and I said, "Look, I'm just a bloke with a chain on." And it sort of petered out, and it made her day, really, the fact that somebody was human and that was in that position. And you've got to be honest.
It's I mean, it is a privileged job, but it also it puts your name, it's a face to a name. People get to see who you are, and I suppose it just adds to well, not your popularity as such, but you're known for a reason. Both you and Les are known for a reason. You're well-known faces, and it does help. You know, you've said at the start, Dave, it's all about putting back into the community yourself. And I suppose it's the same for us here at Black Country Radio. You know, I've been doing this for 13 years, and I can go to a local football club and people will know who I am because I've gone out of my way to sort of put myself out there in the first place. But it is important to get yourself out there and be proactive, isn't it?
It's very much so. I mean, Black Country, you don't, well, you do know, and I hope people realise how important it is to have a local radio station as active as Black Country Radio. And I remember in the early days when you were based at Stourbridge and then involved with Dave Brownhill and then put the backing letters in so you can get the licence and watch you grow into what you are today. Absolutely brilliant organisation and more power to your elbow.
We'll have you back on in the morning, shall we, Dave? There are obviously things that have been left not done or sorted yet. One of those is the Dudley Hippodrome. What's your thoughts about that and the way that's going, if at all?
Oh, you would have to pick that one, wouldn't you?
Sorry.
I've gone up against the defenders of the Dudley Hippodrome on many occasions, not because I have any axe to grind, but I was the councillor that effectively signed the cheque to buy the Hippodrome. And the only reason the council bought the Hippodrome was because nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it for many years before, and it was becoming a haven for drug abuse and all sorts of problems. And it was a problem to the community as well as the borough. And I have had many heated conversations on your station and in person and through emails and various other communications over the Hippodrome. I think it's good that it's going, because once it's gone, we'll move on to the next issue. But we've had many issues over the years that fire people. I'll never forget, for instance, standing up in the council chamber as cabinet member for regeneration and saying, at last, we've got a government grant, we can buy Cavendish House and knock it down. This was in about 2005-06. And I remember clearly David Sparks, who was my opposite number at the time, got up and said, think very carefully before you speak, because I made that statement 10 years ago and it's still there. And guess what? 10 years after I made that statement, it was still there.
Still there, yeah.
This is politics. And like I said earlier on, you start to measure your worth by smaller scales than you initially went in there with. Everybody who stands for election and gets into a position of power to do something makes a difference. It's very easy to criticise, and it's almost natural to criticise people who get that position, but at the same time, walk a mile in their shoes before you judge them too harshly. Because I used to judge people harshly. Then I got the clout when I was leader of the council in particular. I had the clout to make a difference. You suddenly realise that having that power doesn't mean you can just click your fingers and it all happens. It's never that simple. And actually, that's a good thing. I digress a little bit, but I'm going to say this. Back in 2003, I think it was, when we took control of the council, I'd been a councillor for 4 years, and then suddenly I was the cabinet member in control of a big chunk of the council's spending. And I remember saying to the director of finance at the time, it's all going to change now, Mike. And he said, yes, and it's our job to make sure it doesn't change too quickly. And actually, I resented that when he said it. But over the years, I realised that that's actually a good check and balance. Yes, you can make change, but don't do it too quickly, because you don't know what's going to happen at the next election or the one after. And officers of the council have to keep that in mind. If you have a very, very significant change in direction this year and you lose control next year, everybody suffers. Sorry, I'm going out of focus. I have no idea why.
Thought you've been drinking again, Les.
That's what it is. I'm perfectly clear, but I can't see that. Over time, things can change, but you don't want rapid change, certainly not on a year-by-year basis. And it is part of the humbling experience of being a public representative that you realise that small changes eventually lead to a better society for you to live in. And I genuinely believe that the 22 years that me and Dave have been there, we've seen a massive amount of change, but none of it happens suddenly.
Let me just remind everybody, if you've just joined us, this is Election Night Special on Black Country Radio. It's 4 minutes past 11. You'll excuse us for not taking the news bulletin at 11, but we're just enjoying our conversation too much. It's myself and Eve Bennett in the studio taking you through the night. Ian Marrey, along with Councillor standing there, Dave Tyler, and Les Jones joining us on a Zoom call. You can watch us on Facebook Live at the moment and add your comments in there as well. Obviously, Dave, there are certain things that perhaps haven't got done that people would like to get done. Lee Batham sent a message in saying Dudley needs Cradley Heathens, presumably means the Speedway team. Dudley needs the Hippodrome. Dudley doesn't need a driverless car centre. Dudley needs investment in the future. I mean, at the moment, if you're Joe Public and Dudley, do you think you're getting a fair deal out of your council?
Well, I think just going back to the Speedway, I'm a Speedway fan, and I would love to see Cradley Heathens back within Dudley Borough. But I think virtually every site in the borough has been looked at, examined, surveyed, and that's a massive issue, because a lot of people lived quite happily with the Dudley Wood track. It's like everything. Motorsport sometimes doesn't go down too well, because a lot of the housing that's been built up has squeezed those spaces to the point where if you put anything within those gaps now, you automatically create issues with the neighbours. And Speedway is a much quieter sport now, and it would be much more acceptable, and that they've moved on a pace with technology as well. I'd love to see Speedway back. I don't know whether we ever will, but I would love to see it back. Regarding the driverless technology, we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years how technology has moved on with electric vehicles. And whether driverless vehicles will ever be the thing, not in my lifetime. But I would have said electric vehicles would never be a viability 10 years ago. Not in my lifetime. So you don't know, the pace of technology is so rapid at the moment. You never know what's around the corner, to be honest.
I suppose we could have the Midland Metro to that as well. The scheme, obviously, well, at the moment it's Birmingham to Wolverhampton. I suppose when you first became a councillor, you'd have never thought that was going to happen as well. No,
well, I mean, I would have loved to have seen the rail line reopened and used as a rail line. I mean, that in a perfect world, that's what should have happened. The old Stourbridge to Walsall rail line, and you could get on the train and you could have gone to Skegness, north, but that's never going to happen. I don't know whether the Midland Metro is going to generate the infrastructure improvements or the footfall in Dudley Town Centre. I have doubts about that.
What do you reckon, Les? Do you think it's a bit of a pipe dream that our town centres are perhaps going to be what they once were?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a pipe dream that they're going to be what they once were. I've got to say, you mentioned Cradley Heathens. There's another example of one of the things over the 22 years that I keep reminding you about, that I've been a councillor. I've been involved with Cradley Heathens right from the time they started to push to come back into the borough. And I worked with them for many, many years, and we came up against so many obstacles. The biggest one is changes in the law. Environmental controls and things like this have completely changed the position to when the original Speedway track closed. And we went through hoops. I even tried to get somewhere down Pear Tree Lane because it was the most industrial area with the biggest distance before you get to residential areas. And even there were obstacles, not least, of course, that the land values and things like that. But it's never been, certainly from my perspective, it's never been a case of being against something. It's always been a case of how can we make it work? And when you start delving into these things, it's a minefield. Laws that people think are very good in the abstract sense become really bad when it comes down to your particular ambition. I'll give you another example of where that ties in. When the guest hospital closed as a major unit and the land was sold off, it went into a regional body who owned the land value, and they wanted to turn it into a housing estate. The planning application went in, and the first objectors were Thomas Dudley, because they were next door. And they knew that if you build a housing estate right next to a foundry or a factory that makes a lot of noise, in about 5 or 10 years' time, that factory will be closed down because environmental laws will favour the residents and they'll be out of business. It took years to get that particular development into fruition, and it actually reduced the value to the public purse that was making the site available for development by hundreds of thousands of pounds, because measures had to be put in place to protect the future residents from the existing business. Now imagine that with a speedway track. The Speedway company and never the organisation that run that are never going to be able to find that spare cash to put all those mitigation measures in place. So it was an impractical ambition. And again, I got into trouble for saying to them, you're never going to get it in Dudley, because that's the reality. Not because I didn't want them to be in Dudley, but because I knew that taking their financial position into account and the law as it stood, it was never going to be viable. Now, when you talk about the driverless vehicle thing, that will actually bring jobs to Dudley. The best way to regenerate towns is to increase the spending power of the people who live around them. And actually, from that point of view, the driverless car centre is a major win for Dudley.
Interesting stuff. I'll tell you what else I wanted to talk about, Les. You obviously stood up against Ian Austin as MP, or trying to get his seat twice near Dudley North. I mean, that's something completely different again, really. So, trying to be a Westminster MP instead of a council. I'm not trying to decry saying just a councillor, but you know what I'm getting at. It's a huge thing to become an MP. Any regrets about that? Trying to unseat Ian?
Well, no. I mean, my first attempt to get elected to Parliament was actually just 2 years after I became a councillor in 2001. I stood in Haleshead in Rowley Regis against Sylvia Heal. And I did the same again in 2005. A lot of people said to me in 2001, "You're getting above your station. You're a councillor. Why don't you be settled with that? Why do you want to become an MP now? Is it just because you think, I can get elected here? Why can't I get elected anywhere else?" I believed that I had enough to give to make a difference on the national stage, as well as locally. I've never had the opportunity to prove one way or the other whether that's true, but I don't regret it at all. What I do regret is losing to Ian in 2017 by just 2 votes.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think it would have been a job you'd have enjoyed?
I think, okay. I never fancied the idea of spending 5 days a week in London and 2 days a week where I feel comfortable. Having said that, I only ever stood in seats that I've been a part of. I stood in House. I mean, I did at one point try to go for Edgbaston in Birmingham because I used to live in Quinton many years ago, which is part of the Edgbaston constituency. I was told that I could have easily got a safe seat or a relatively safe seat in Parliament if I'd have been willing to go into the Shire counties. I'm an urban dweller. I've always been an urban dweller. I've lived in Birmingham and the Black Country and nowhere else for any length of time. And I just felt that if I want to represent an area, I've got to instinctively know what people in that area are going to benefit from and what they're going to lose by. And so I regret not getting elected. I don't regret not having to live in London for most of my working life. But I don't regret making the decision to fight difficult seats and failing to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Ian, do you think it's important, if you're going to try and be an MP, to be somebody that is known well in the community? And I say this because obviously Ian Austin and Les are very well known in the area, but we have had MPs who have sort of been jetted in, as it were, into the area, and perhaps you could argue that that they shouldn't have been, and what they actually have done in the past, or perhaps even doing now, isn't necessarily what the public want. What's your thoughts about that?
I mean, personally, I prefer to have an MP who knows the place they live in. I think that's important. Reality doesn't need to be. There are plenty of examples of MPs, very successful MPs, who have little or no affinity with the area that they're elected to until they are elected to it. I mean, and ultimately that's for the electorate to decide whether that's important. We go back to the MP for Stourbridge before the current incumbent, Margot James. She was local-ish, but she was not Stourbridge, but she became embedded in Stourbridge town. I mean, everybody knew her. She was active. She always came on our radio station, which was great. Those type of community MPs, perhaps the ones who don't have their eye on the higher offices in government or in opposition, I think they're worth their weight in gold. And the reality is that is the vast majority of MPs in Parliament. There are 650 of them. Most of them are on the backbenches, in committees, select committees, and they are working in their constituency. Another one that I think is worthy of a shout out is Mike Wood in Dudley South. Mm-hmm. Knows his constituency well. He served as a councillor in Dudley and is a good constituency MP. I think it's better, but it's not important. I do want to point out 2017 though, and a question for Les. You mentioned that the small majority that Ian Austin had over you. There's another number. It's 2,144. Number of votes that Bill Etheridge got for UKIP. Do you wish he hadn't have stood that year?
Are you talking about 2017 now or 2015?
2017.
Do I wish I hadn't stood that year?
No. Do you wish Bill Etheridge hadn't stood?
I begged him not to. He desperately wanted to get rid of Ian Austin, rightly or wrongly. And I pointed out to him that the only way that was going to be achieved was for him not to stand, because he had a loyal vote that he'd worked on over many, many years before. And there is no question about it. But you talk to any of his loyal team that worked around him, and they all argued that they were only taking votes out of Ian Austin. I'm sorry, I find that a little bit bizarre.
Because I remember covering that night for Black Country Radio, and I think that going into that, I would have said that you would have won that seat at that election. Talked earlier in this about how politics have become unpredictable. The 2017 election was rather unique and surprising in its outcome in any case. But in those sort of marginal seats, which Dudley North had become, I mean, you picked up quite a lot of votes from 2015. You narrowed the majority.
Well, I think he had something close to a 6,500 majority in 2015.
Yeah, you're 30% of the vote for yourself, 42% for Ian Austin, and of course 46.4 and 46.5. There was 0.1% in it. I mean, you've served as leader of Dudley Council. You've had a long career as a councillor. May that be the one thing you do regret, not having had that opportunity to be an MP, in spite of all the things that you wouldn't have liked about it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would have stood again in 2019 had the party allowed me to, because I do think that there's something I could have given. So yeah, there's a little bit of sadness about that. And you're absolutely right. On that night, I think it was commented by your station how well I took it, losing my 2 votes. That's because I've always believed in one simple principle: don't stand if you're not prepared to lose. But having said that, it was a difficult night for me, because I genuinely believe I should have won because of the run up to the election and everything that went around it. And on the night, it just fell short. And I do believe the UKIP factor was a big part of that. As you say, 2,500 votes. Even if it went 50-50, I think there'd probably be slightly on the Conservative side of that 50-50 would have given me a win, and I would have been a member of Parliament. And I would like to think, you see, I always had a great deal of respect for Ian. I didn't like him very much because he was the opposition, but I always have had a lot of respect for him, because what he was a down to earth, get on with it, make sure you speak up for the people that you represent, MP. And I think I could have fulfilled that role too. And so, yeah, I regret the outcome. I don't regret standing. And I certainly don't resent the outcome. It's just one of those things. I love politics. I actually believe that the process is important. And I think one of the most important things about the process is that people are given a choice. I just want to step back to 2015, actually, Ian, because I came in at the last minute on the 2015 election because we had a candidate that let us down very, very badly. And the view of the party, both locally and nationally, was that they needed somebody with a profile that was respected or respectable to try and fill that gap, because there was a real expectation that we might be pushed into 3rd place by UKIP. And from a party perspective, that would have been a disaster. And so whilst I lost by a big margin to Ian in that election, I'm still proud of the fact that I kept our 2nd place in that election and pushed UKIP into 3rd, because I think it would have been a very, very untidy few years if UKIP had actually got 2nd in that particular election. And I think they would have thrown everything at what I consider to be a divisive approach to politics in anticipation of the election that followed. So whilst I'm sad that I didn't succeed, I'm proud that I played my part in letting democracy take place in Dudley North that year.
I mean, I'm pleased to say we've had lots of viewers so far and lots of interaction as well. Eve's been monitoring some of the comments have been going through. Eve?
Yeah, there was an interesting one actually from Craig, and he said that he agrees with the fact that there are other parties that were standing that were perhaps splitting the vote and changing the outcome. And the same could be applied to the last time that these seats were up for election, which was back in 2016. UKIP's fortunes have changed dramatically since then. And if you look at the amount of candidates that UKIP are fielding this time, they've been open themselves that after the departure of Nigel Farage, it's been quite a difficult time for them in terms of polling with the electorate now that their message is perhaps not as clear post-Brexit. Do you think that the fact that there are perhaps less parties on the side of the sort of where Tory voters would perhaps normally pick, do you think that that might influence the outcome this evening, that the Tory vote might be less split, which could play into their hands quite well? That's open to anybody.
Dave, perhaps start with you.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a difficult night tonight because there was an assumption that a lot of the UKIP voters would have traditionally come from the right wing of politics. But having spoken to people on the ground, they came from all over the place to support UKIP because Brexit was the big issue. And I don't know where those votes are going to go back to if the people turn out to vote. I've just been looking at some of the percentages of votes coming in. I think it's around about 25 to 30%. With the usual places traditionally got a higher percentage turnout, they're staying the same, and the same with the lower percentage wards. I don't know where the UKIP votes are going to go back to, and I think you'd be a fool to try and predict that, to be quite honest, because there's a lot of water gone under the bridge since then. Brexit is finished, it's done. A lot of those people might think, right, what next can I turn my fire on? What next can I make a difference? Because I made a difference with Brexit. What else can I do to make a difference? So there might be other challenges for people politically, and they might have changed their views on a lot of things.
Okay, Dave, you might want to put your camera back on. We've lost your picture for the moment, if you're able to. Eve, some more. That's much better. We can see you now.
Yeah, we've had another one in from Glenn who said Dudley could be a great town again if people would just listen to each other and work together. I suppose when it comes to local elections on the actual night, it's very party political. Obviously, each party wants to perform well, take control of each respective council, etc., etc. But when all the dust has settled, essentially, I mean, Dave and Les, you've both been councillors for an incredibly long time, and you have touched on this slightly already. How important do you think ultimately, especially at a local level, it is to just work together to get things done for the community that you are serving?
I think it's crucial, Eve, because Les alluded to this earlier. If there's one meeting I would tell the people not to judge a council on, it's the full council meeting, because nothing gets organised at the full council meeting. It's all done behind the scenes in the scrutiny committees, and that's where the bulk of the work is done. Actually, by the time stuff comes to the full council meeting, it's all been decided. It's just really just to sign things off. But that's the public face that the council see, and it's not the best face sometimes, because it's not what we should be judged on, because some of them are quite onerous meetings and not pleasant, to be quite honest. It'd be good if, in fact, the meetings have been better when it's been on Teams.
What, so you can't reach out and suck each other over the table?
Yeah. It's been better on Teams.
Yeah. Let's talk about what's been going on. We've lost Les for a moment or two. Hopefully he'll come back shortly. Obviously, we've got the council elections have been taking place today. We've also got the PCC elections and the mayoral elections as well. First of all, Dave, let's get your thoughts on Andy Street and the job that he's done while he's been mayor.
Well, Andy Street's been high profile. I've met him on a couple of occasions, and without any doubt, I want to say that I'd like to see a Labour mayor in that seat, because I think it'd be good to see change, and like we said earlier on, it's good to see change at a local level. It's also good to see change at a regional level. So 4 years is a long time in politics. A week is a long time in politics.
You'd rather see a Labour mayor this time?
See a Labour mayor, yeah.
Les, what are your thoughts on the job that Andy Street has done?
Well, I've got to be honest with you. I fundamentally disagree with what Dave just said, because Andy Street has not been a political mayor. He's been a business mayor. He's been driven by getting change, and what he's done is actually very successfully brought investment into particularly the Black Country that we've never seen before we had elected mayors, because the region was dominated by Birmingham. And what Andy has done is he's looked at the whole, realised that his job is to look after the interests of the whole, and he's sought that investment and tried to distribute it in an even-handed fashion. And I have to say that the forecasts are that Andy Street is going to win by a much better margin than he did last time. I'm really pleased about that, because I think he needs at least 2 terms to see through what he's already started. I can give you a little anecdote. After I failed to become Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands, I set my sights on becoming Mayor for the West Midlands, because back to this principle of wanting to represent the area you come from, I know the Midlands well, and I know the West Midlands area well. Oh, good. I was going to ask you about this. Are we going to see some action in the counting room? But what I was going to just to make that point, I actually went to see Andy before he was nominated, and told him that I would stand aside from the challenge. Not that I would stand any chance of beating him in the challenge, but that I would stand aside because I thought he was the right man to go for it, because he was not from a political background. He got a background in business, and I think that's exactly what we need at that level. And we don't want an MP who decides that he wants a much easier life, earning the same money, doing the mayor's job. I genuinely think that we want somebody who is attuned to the needs of the region rather than to the needs of politics.
Any thoughts about the police? And oh, sorry, Dave, I think you want to come back in there.
Yeah, just very briefly on that. I mean, at the West Midlands mayor level, you don't have to be a businessman or a former businessman to be in that position, because you will surround yourselves with a team that can do the job, and they will be business people, and there'll be people from all walks of life. So at a regional level, I think whoever gets the position will be carrying on the work that the previous incumbent has started.
Okay, just bear with us a moment, Dave. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you should be able to see the Crystal Leisure Centre, which we'll try and expand for you. I mean, considering there's not supposed to be any people in there, there seem to be an awful lot of people in there, to be honest. But these are the people, or guests, the counters and the vote counters, and perhaps also some of the candidates in there as well. We'll try and talk to Dave Brownhill, who's down there in the moment. I don't know if he can hear us at all on the line, but it'd be interesting just to get his perspective on what he can see there at the moment, because we're not expecting any results for quite some time yet. Dave, can you hear us?
I can, Adam. How are you? All right.
I am very well, mate. Thank you.
Good. Right. What we've got here, what we've actually got, and you can see so far, we've had the first 11 boxes back in from the count so far. At the far end of the room is where all the boxes are going to be marked up. The first 11 are through. And what you can see is the candidates, also the MPs are here tonight. There's various scrutineers, and they're actually at the moment just putting all the votes into bundles of 50. Now that's all the votes of today. So that's the PCC, the mayoral votes, as well as the local election votes. So that's what they're currently doing here.
It was our understanding that you were going to get very limited access to the Crystal Leisure Centre tonight, but you seem to have got yourself a prime position at the moment.
We're upstairs. We're not allowed into the hallway. That's only for the candidates and the various politicians. But they put us upstairs in what they call a media room. I wouldn't call it a media room, but it's got a good vantage point of seeing what's actually going on downstairs.
So, are you happier than you were about an hour ago?
Yeah, I think we thought we'd be in a room that we couldn't overview into the hallway, but yeah, so the vantage point is quite good. A few of the candidates have already come up. They're, I think, a little bit nervous because it's that time of the evening now where they've done everything that they can do, and it's now just a waiting game. And I think
we can see against the far wall. There's like a big screen and perhaps a table. Are the declarations actually going to take place from within that room there?
Yeah, I'll show you that the declarations are going to take place here. Look, right
in front of you. Okay,
just below me then. So that's where they're going to be taking place.
There's a microphone, Adam.
Yeah, and what they'll actually do there was, once they've announced that there won't be any speeches from the candidates tonight, but as soon as they finish the declaration there, they then go back out of the hall, at the exit where there is a marquee, and there'll be some press briefings there, and we can catch up with the candidates at that point.
And roughly, are we looking at about 2 a.m. for the first of the results?
I think it'll be even later than that, Adam. I think it may even be like 3 o'clock, I think. But it's going to be a long night. But it's going to be an interesting one. They're saying that in certain areas the turnout is quite low, but of course we know that the postal vote in Dudley was very high.
Okay, Dave, we'll talk to you as the evening progresses. Thank you for the moment.
Cheers, thank you.
That's Dave Brownhill down at the Crystal Leisure Centre. Ian, Dave sort of indicating there that it looks like a lowish turnout, which is sort of goes in line with what you were saying, really.
Yeah, I would have liked to expect a higher turnout, but I don't think it was ever. It was ever going to happen. I mean, I'm interested to see whether some of the closer seats, we've concentrated on 4 over the last few weeks: Bridie Hill, Wollaston and Stourbridge Town, Quarrybank and Dudley Wood, and Brockmore and Pensnet. All of those were double-digit majorities in 2019. I would like to think that the candidates in all of those 4 have gone that extra mile to try and attract voters. We talked to all of them over the last few weeks about how they were going to attract that. You know, nearly 80% of people often that aren't voting at local elections. And of course, that also flips over this year again into the elections for the mayor and the police and crime commissioner, which they're not particularly long-standing, but they've never really hit the heights when it comes to election turnout. It's going to be the same again this year. So both for the mayor and the police and crime commissioner, they're going to get in with, you know, a tops 25, maybe a 30% turnout, which I guess for the mayor and PCC elections is probably better than they've had before. But in terms of democracy, it's not healthy, in my opinion. And I think that I really hoped actually after the EU referendum that we would have seen a growth in electoral participation. I think that the general election in 2019 had some aspects of that, but again, many people argue that was a Brexit election and that people were still enthused by wanting to get Brexit done, and perhaps to a lesser extent trying to stop it. But I think that probably that the best turnout in Dudley is going to be around about 30%. We're going to see quite a lot around about 21, 22%. It wouldn't surprise me to see a couple of turnouts in the teens. And it's depressing.
It is depressing. It's disappointing, isn't it, Dave? Particularly for local prospective councillors who go out and no doubt put a lot of work into trying to canvass for these votes, and the interest just doesn't seem to be there, or not in big numbers anyway.
It,
Sorry, go on, Dave.
it is depressing because at the end of the day, it's a 70% of people who don't vote who actually dictate who the councillor is. But the 20 to 30% of people that make the effort, all credit to them, that's all I can say. But it's depressing from a councillor candidate's point of view, because they put a lot of time and effort, and they put the families on the line as well. We shouldn't forget the families, because they have to go through this with the partners when they put up for election. They take the highs and the lows with it as well. And you'd expect a better feedback from the public. Unfortunately, it's not to be. The general elections tend to be the only one that have garnered any interest from the public.
Is a concern perhaps that even those people who have voted this time are basing it on national issues rather than local issues?
I think a lot of people will be. I mean, they'll be looking at COVID. And we mentioned it before the COVID bounce. But I really wish that people could distinguish between local issues and national issues, because most of the stuff that's going to affect you as a resident is going to be local issues. National issues, you'll have no influence over them, because you only get that choice every 5 years now.
Mm.
If you want a council that's going to work for you as a resident, you really need to look harshly at who you're going to get working for you on your ward, who you want to represent you.
Mm-hmm. And Les, we've had a message in from Mitchell Bolton. Good evening to you, Mitchell. He says, I voted at 9:10 a.m. this morning, and I was the first in the station at that point, presumably in the polling station. I mean, that doesn't say a lot for local politics, does it?
Well, I don't really set much store in what time of day people measure the vote, because every year that I've stood for election, in fact, in years that I don't stand for election, I've been an agent. I go around all the polling stations, and the bulk of the voting is done between about 6 and 8 p.m. And tonight we've seen across the borough queues outside polling stations between those hours. So what people have done at first thing in the morning is not particularly relevant. I have to say, though, it's quite interesting listening to Dave and Ian, because I know that they are both sort of to the left in the political spectrum. It's quite common for low turnouts to happen when the government of the day is not unpopular. Usually you get high turnouts when people want to vote against something rather than for something. And it's not uncommon for people to be more apathetic when they're quite happy to let things lie. However, I will say that I'm not absolutely convinced that the turnout's going to be particularly low this year. I think what we're going to see is that there is unquestionably something like a 20 to 25% increase in the number of postal votes that have been applied for this year. And I think COVID has had a big part to play in that. I think a lot of people were uncomfortable about visiting polling stations and have applied where they wouldn't normally apply for a postal vote. They've applied for one this year. So I'm not convinced the turnout is going to be as low as you think. And I'm hoping, I mean, we're all agreeing that a low turnout is a bad thing. But at the same time, I'm not as pessimistic about the turnout as those two have just alluded to.
Eve?
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the areas where turnout is low in general elections as well as local elections is amongst young people. So many young people that I know are just so detached from local politics. For some of them, this one will be the first election that they can technically vote in. And I've spoken to quite a few people who've gone, oh, I'll just wait for the general election. And we spoke a little bit earlier about the importance of new young councillors coming in and shaking up things. But how do you think that we can get more young people interested in local politics? Because after all, as you said, it's going to shape their lives in ways that perhaps they're not realising.
I'm personally not convinced you can. We recently had, I think, one of the youngest councillors we've ever had in Dudley, in Jake Cooper. Jake got involved in my general election campaign back in 2017, and he got so fired up that he was thinking of standing in an unwinnable seat just to get some experience, and then changed his mind and wanted to go for it and got elected. But then university's taken over, his life has taken over, and he's moved away from the mainstream of politics, and I'm hoping he'll come back sometime in the future, but he's getting on with his life. And I remember when I was 18 years old, I was far too busy getting on with building a career to take that much interest in politics. Now, yes, the world has moved on, and certainly on single issues, a lot more young people are engaged in politics, but I don't think it's that unusual for politics not to be front and center of the thoughts of most young people at the age of sort of 18 to 25, because they are far busier getting on with creating lives for themselves. And I don't think we're going to change that. I think it's a natural progression. You leave school, you're looking, I mean, with all the drivers now for people to do well in their academic lives and to map out their future very early on in life, it doesn't surprise me that young people don't engage that much with politics. Those that do tend to be activists in an area of interest to themselves, rather than the wider picture of politics in general. That's my view. I might be wrong, but my experience of meeting with and talking to lots and lots of young people over the years is just that.
I was going to say, Eve, I mean, you're that generation where you know whether people your age are going to vote or not. And normally it tends to be if there's a particular issue, like Brexit, for example, and even when the Labour leadership was and so many young people joined the Labour Party in order to try and get Jeremy Corbyn to be the leader. If there is something, I won't call it a bandwagon, but you know what I mean, if there's something to sort of latch onto, that will grab the imagination of younger people, won't it? Whereas I guess local politics is sort of a bit wishy-washy. It's nothing really to hang on to.
Of course, social media also plays a massive role in that. You know, something can quite literally trend on Twitter, and young people are, of course, going to be at the front of that. I mean, so many people that I follow, most of the people I follow on Twitter are political inherently by their nature. And so they will be getting involved in politics. But I suppose that is somewhat of an echo chamber, because people who are, you know, very vocal about their political views are more likely to be on social media platforms talking about their political views. But young people do swing depending on issues. I mean, one amazing example would be with the Liberal Democrats, who won the young people vote based on their promise to abolish tuition fees, and then didn't do so in coalition. And while young people voted with their feet, and they've been rather unpopular amongst that demographic ever since. So I do think that young people are engaged, they are listening, but I do think Les is right. I suppose with local politics, especially if young people are moving away to university, they're changing, they're not living in the same area. They might feel, well, you know, perhaps this isn't an area for me if I'm not looking to childcare, I'm not looking at who's doing the bins, I'm not looking at the local spaces and areas. Perhaps that's why they do feel that maybe Westminster is where they should be voting, because that's where the big issues such as education and, you know, careers and funding for different sectors that they're going into is at. But, you know, there are young people out there that are politically engaged. We've just had a message on Facebook actually from Kashmir, and he's actually Wolverhampton's youngest candidate this year. He's standing for Labour, and he's just at the Wolverhampton waiting for the verification. And he said, I completely understand what's being stated here, knowing the polarization that politics has on my generation. I don't as it stands intend to run again in 22, he says, because of his job and it's impossible really to balance that representation with his work. So I do think Les is right, and he did also say the average age of a councillor is 59, and it will probably stay like that unless something is done to sort of allow young people to get involved in politics without sacrificing the forward momentum that they've kind of got going on in their lives as well.
Is it because you can't make a career out of it? Is that the reason? If you could make a career out of being a councillor, do you think that would get more people involved at an earlier age?
If you're asking me, I do hope not.
No, please.
If you want to be a career councillor, you should not be standing.
True.
Ian?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that anybody who sets out to be a politician is probably not the person you should be voting for. I think, the accidental politician, the people who do it for a sense of purpose because they've evolved into it, I think is the perfect local councillor. For me, local councillors have got three main priorities: trees, potholes, dog poo. You find me the local councillor who can solve those three issues together, not one at a time. There's plenty who can solve one of them, but can deal with all three at the same time. They should become the career councillor, because it is. I always said that a good councillor understands what goes on outside people's front doors.
Yeah.
And that's in terms of local politics, that's pretty much what most people are interested in on a day-to-day business. And that's what local councils do. They do the day-to-day business. They clean the rubbish. They deal with the roads, the potholes. They do other things as well. I'm not saying that it's that narrow focus, but these are the things that people find really important. I remember when I was canvassing back in 2012, there was a lady, I knocked on her door, and she had a big tree outside her house. It was huge, and it sort of all the canopy was all over a garden, and it blocked her light out. In 2015, when I stood down, that tree was still in the same place with the same canopy, still blocking her light. And actually, for me, that felt like a failure. And you talked about, Les, what your legacy, and Dave, what's your legacy from being a councillor? My legacy is I failed to get a tree dealt with. We only had one tree surgeon in the whole Dudley Borough at the time, and there was a very, very, very large manual about what they could and couldn't do, but I didn't get that resolved, and that to me was quite important, because it was one of the first issues that I picked up before I was a councillor. And I kept going back to it pretty much year on year and talking to that woman and explaining why we couldn't do anything about it. And I always felt frustrated, because I thought, surely we could do something about it if we really wanted to.
Can I just say that I wholeheartedly support what Ian said, because I've said to everybody who's wanted to be a council candidate that there are only three things that matter: the bins, the roads, and litter. As long as you fix all three of those, or at least promise to try, you're going to get elected, because people pay their council tax, and those are the only things they believe they are paying it for.
Is there too much red tape in trying to get things done?
Yeah, there's far too much red tape, and there's policies in place that have been there since time immemorial that you have to abide by, the trees and the housing and various issues like that. But just going back to the original question, how do you get younger people involved in politics? At 18 years of age, it's extremely difficult to get someone to go full on and engage in local politics. Extremely difficult. But the problem isn't just at local level, it's at national level as well. But if you've got a local issue that really is affecting young people, that's when you can get them involved. But the problem is, sometimes it's the councillor that's driving the issue and saying, join me to fight this issue. In actual fact, what the councillor should be saying is, if we join together, we can sort this issue. Because you can't do everything on your own. You need to work with the community and not apart from them. And one of the big issues that's going to be affecting the younger generation, as far as I can see, is a growing concern about the environment. And that's when you'll get younger people involved in campaigning issues and joining together.
Eve, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, of course, this is just my experience on the ground, but having spoken to a lot of young people who feel just generally quite disillusioned, I suppose. I mean, looking at it from my perspective, this is just purely me. Of course, this isn't everybody, but I've had more of my life under a Conservative government than Labour at this point. And, you know, Brexit has really impacted my life, my studies, my career path. And, you know, it's been a really turbulent time the last sort of 8-9 years in politics. And that's kind of all our generation has really ever known. But I know, as you were saying, a lot of young people are very aware of the pressing urgency of the climate crisis, purely because it's their generation that will start to be the ones that really see that impact, and their children that are really going to be the ones that suffer if we don't act now. And I think that's why the Greens do manage to get quite a lot of the vote from young people, because unfortunately, because of the first past the post system, it is quite difficult for the Greens to make major headways in terms of seats. But I think a lot of people will think that they've spent their vote wisely in their mind, because they know that they've voted perhaps not in a way that's going to influence the outcome, but in a way that aligns with kind of their vision for the future. And if you looked at the mayoral election debates, the way that the mayoral candidates were talking, all of the parties were the green agenda, making the West Midlands the sort of green heartland, the example for how the UK can sort of build back after the pandemic in a green way, and investing in environmentally friendly transport, for example. That's been big on the agenda of all the parties. And I think hopefully the you know, that will start to climb up the agenda as our age group becomes the overwhelming demographic that are swaying the outcome. But yeah, at the moment, I know a lot of people vote Greens knowing that it won't sway the vote, but knowing that they've voted in alignment with an issue that they can get behind, and the environment's definitely an issue that young people can get behind.
Okay, just to remind everybody, you're listening to Election Night on Black Country Radio. It's 5 to midnight. I'm aware, gentlemen, that you turn into pumpkins in about 5 minutes' time, so we won't go on too much longer with this part of the program. We will let you go and get some rest. But let me just remind everyone, it's Adam Parks and Eve Bennett in the studio. Dave Brownhill is down at the Crystal Leisure Centre, where the declarations will be taking place for Dudley Council this evening. And Ian Marrey joins us from his home, because he's having to, unfortunately, self-isolate. But he's still here, and it's Ian I want to talk to next, because we've mentioned the council elections, we've briefly mentioned the mayoral elections, we've got the police and crime commissioner elections as well. Do you think you know, there's going to be correlation between all three, in the respect, if you vote one colour for one, you're going to vote the same for the others as well?
Picking up on something that Les said earlier about Andy Street, if there was one who was going to stand out from the sort of Let's Vote party 3 times, I think Andy Street is one who could split vote. He could attract votes, I think, from different sort of political backgrounds. I think personally, I think some of that's quite deliberate on his part. He's not aligned himself very closely with the National Conservative Party.
Absolutely.
He set himself out on his own agenda, his own achievements. I've spoken to all the mayoral candidates, I think all of them, over the last few months, and Andy Street was probably the one who, again, Les mentioned this, the incumbent. He's grown into the job, he's grown into the role, but he didn't sound like a politician. It's the first time we'd got to speak to him on Black Country Radio, and I was pleasantly surprised. He was easy to talk to. He clearly had this a grasp on what he'd done and how he'd worked across the whole of the region. It was a very interesting and quite an enlightening conversation. I think he's one who could perhaps get votes in a way that the others couldn't. I think Liam Byrne, the Labour candidate, is very Labour. He's been a Labour MP in Highfield, Birmingham for a number of years. His fame or infamy is quite well known. He's the one who left the note in 2010.
Yeah.
There's no money left.
He is a politician. I think to the Liberal Democrats, Jenny Wilkinson, I think her and the Green candidate, frankly, have no chance whatsoever of making any difference on this election, other than had it been a bit closer, the second preferences could have been important. I don't think that will happen. So I think for the mayoral race, I think that Andy Street may pick up more, and I think that will be reflected in his increased majority this time. The Police and Crime Commissioner, I think probably very few people will know any of them to any extent whatsoever. And at that point, they will go down party line. Well, if I voted predominantly Conservative or predominantly Labour or predominantly Lib Dem, that I'll go the same for the Police and Crime Commissioner. The Liberal Democrat Police and Crime Commissioner wants to ban the role. That would be his. That was his pledge.
I was about to say that actually, Ian, that some people might break with party lines purely because they might be of the opinion, as a lot of people are. I believe Andy Street tried to get the PCC sort of incorporated into the mayoral role because some people are of the opinion that it would be better in that way as it was in Manchester. And John Hunt is running on the proviso that if he is elected, he will dissolve the position itself. And so that might be a reason for people to break party line in that respect, if they know that, of course, because as you said, a lot of people haven't been following that election as much.
And the only reason I know that is because we interviewed him on the show.
Because we interviewed him, absolutely.
Can I just say something on that though? I definitely have this view, having stood as Police and Crime Commissioner twice and seen the turnouts. The by-election was absolutely pathetic. I think it was something like 11%. And I think it was not much better. It was knocking up towards 20%, but I don't think it actually hit 20% the second time I stood. There is no question about it. And I've been right across the West Midlands doing this. Nobody wanted a Police and Crime Commission, and nobody thought it was a good idea. And nobody was motivated to go out and vote for one. Some people instinctively vote for whatever elected position there is. But that was why the turnout existed at all, because I think the majority of people didn't want a Police and Crime Commissioner. I actually think it was a good idea. I think it was the right thing to do, because I think police authorities were a completely moribund bunch. And I served on one of those too, so I'm talking from experience here. But what I think will happen, we have two things. The mayoral election happened at the same time as local elections, and I think the turnout in the local elections made the difference in the mayoral election. The turnout was higher than it would have been for a first-time election, and I think this time the Police and Crime Commissioner candidates are going to benefit from whoever is the front runner in the mayoral election. I think once people get in the ballot into the polling station and they get the 3 ballot papers given to them, I mean, I heard anecdotally of thousands of people being given 2 ballot papers for the Police and Crime Commissioner in the local elections and tearing the one up because they just didn't agree with it. When they got 3 ballot papers and they are motivated to vote for the mayor, I think they will carry that vote across into the Police and Crime Commissioner election. I genuinely think the turnout is going to be higher than traditionally so with the Police and Crime Commissioner. And I think if Andy Street wins, I think we'll either run it very, very close for the Police and Crime Commissioner or win it. And it will be a one-off experience, because the core vote turnout in Birmingham tends to be the Labour vote. And in normal circumstances, Labour will always win the Police and Crime Commissioner election. I think this year it could be very, very different. And I'm genuinely hoping I'm right, because I think we need to have a churn in any position to see whether it's a worthwhile role or not. So you can see how I genuinely think that Jay Sohal has got a chance of becoming the Police and Crime Commissioner off the back of Andy Street's success.
Dave, what's your views?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Les. I think when people get in the polling booth, they'll go tick, tick, tick on, and they'll go along party lines. So, but I've stopped predicting, to be quite honest. You're talking to a man who's never won Euro lottery. So I'm
You and everybody else.
So I'm never going to predict the results of elections. So I think it's in the lap of the gods, to be quite honest.
I've got to be honest, Ian, you know, I've been to vote tonight and I don't know who half the candidates are, and most people won't. You know, I know who Chris Bramwell is because he's stood in my ward for every local election since about 1943, I think. But that people like Chris are few and far between. You are voting for party, and I think, like Dave said, I was given 3 pieces of paper to take into the little booth to put my cross against it, and you look for party and you go, well, not tick tick tick, but cross cross cross. You know, you put it against the party that you think is most relevant to your beliefs. So that's why I ask if you think that the correlation is the same across all three votes. I take on board Leslie's point that Andy Street is someone a bit different. I wouldn't call him charismatic because that isn't how he comes across, but you know, he divides opinion. He's what he is, and but he does get himself out in the media, which I think is also important. Whereas, for example, David, whatever his name is, the current Police and Crime Commissioner, and that shows what an impression he's had on me because I can't even remember his second name. Jameson, of course. Yeah, he says nodding his head in agreement. but do you see what I'm getting at, Ian?
Yeah, I do. In this era of social media where people can be so public and so out there that actually if you're not, it can be a disadvantage. And I think this is where Andy Street has succeeded. I think he was quite quiet, and I said earlier, I think he's grown into the role. For the first couple of years, from many people's perspective, I think he was just the previous chief executive of John Lewis, but it wasn't really clear what he was doing. It was a new role for a start, so I think people didn't know what the mayor role was. But in certainly the last 12 months, and I got a feeling that may be down to the fact that he expected to face Liam Byrne as his potential rival in this election. That Liam Byrne has got that recognition at a national level and therefore at a local and regional level. And I think that Andy Street really needed to up his game in that respect. I think he's clearly got good people around him because he has. He's been out there, he's out front. He now looks like a leader rather than a chairman, because one of the roles of the mayor is to be the chair of the board, basically the political leaders across the West Midlands. And I think he's coming across as a leader. But by the same token, you talk Derek who, and I keep calling him Derek Jameson, who I think is an actor. I've never, which is why I've always been quite wary about interviewing him because I have to say his name. But there are a lot of people out there who aspire but are anonymous. But I did want to pick on something Dave did just say there, is that he doesn't like to predict, because I think we should predict. I think, if we're here live on radio and on Facebook, we should be predicting the outcome of the elections. Okay,
we'll go ladies first if you don't mind. By the way, Derek Jameson was the old Radio 2 presenter, and wasn't he also a press editor of one of the national newspapers?
He's got a higher profile than the Police and Crime Commissioner, that's for sure.
He used to do film night as well, if I remember. Wasn't he Australian?
I don't know. He had a proper Cockney accent, didn't he? So, do they mean me?
I thought he was Australian, but there you go.
I don't know. What do I know? Ladies first then. What do you think is going to happen tonight?
Are we talking Dudley level, mayoral level?
Let's talk Dudley level between us first, and then we'll talk national level afterwards.
I'm not gonna lie, if I'm being brutally honest, just in the last sort of half an hour as we've been talking, I've been scrolling Twitter, looking at the general mood across the country from people who are at the counts. Also just thinking about the general situation, I would probably imagine that the Conservatives will increase their majority in the Dudley Council if I was to be put on the spot. But I could be wrong because my predictions have never been never been great. I was very, very upset at the 2019 general election that my predictions were so off.
So how many seats will they gain tonight?
I don't imagine it will be Boris level surprise.
Couple.
Yeah, I think they'll gain control in the sense that it's not a minority and not to the wire, not on a knife edge.
You're going to pin it down to a seat?
No, you couldn't. I don't know enough about the ins and outs of Dudley Council to make that guess. I think Dave and Les, probably Ian as well, would probably be much more best placed to do seat numbers.
And Andy Street?
I think Andy Street will increase his majority purely for the reason that Ian has said that. I do think that his arguable, you could argue, distance from the Conservative Party, which he's made clear. There was a massive article in the Times about it a couple of weeks ago as well, saying that he's always been quite clear on where he stands in that respect. Plus the fact that I think a lot of people ultimately will want him to finish what he started. They elected him on a slim majority. He was very quiet for the first couple of years, but as Ian said, he has grown into the role. And I think a lot of people from the people I've spoken to are very much of the opinion that he's got quite a few major projects underway, and so why vote him out when he's halfway through them, really? And
police and crime, probably.
Or
don't you care?
It's not that I don't care, but as you said, I think it might just be a case of, I hate to be cynical, but tick tick tick. So maybe wherever the mayor goes, then I imagine maybe the police and crime commissioner will follow. But that one is the one I'm probably least sure about. If the turnout's lower on that one, I don't know.
Ian, we'll ask you next. Perhaps give me the answer that Eve couldn't. If anything's going to change, where are things going to change?
All right, so get your pen and paper out because I'm going to go to bed. But
I actually will get my pen and paper. I've got my list of wards here, so I'll write down notes. Has anyone got a pen I can write with?
I've got some predictions for Dudley. The Conservative Party are going to win in Briley Hill for the first time since the 1970s.
Wow.
Do you really? I'm still trying to find my pen, so I'm making a mental note right now.
I forget her name, but there was a Conservative councillor in 1974 for one term. Other than that, it's been solidly Labour. It's been getting closer.
Yeah, I have in my notes staunch Labour. So you think Adam Davies is going to win there tonight?
Yeah, double-digit majority in 2019. I think it will flip to the Conservatives. There's one gain. Quarry Bank and Dudley Wood. This is the seat that was Brian Cottrell is standing down from. Again, it's double-digit majority for the Labour Party in 2019. I predict that will go to the Conservatives. 2 gains for the Conservative Party from 2019 Brockmore and Penn's Nets, and I know Nick Gregory is chatting away on our Facebook feed.
Is this where Steve Edwards is standing from the Black?
Steve Edwards is standing in Brockmore and Penn's Net for the Black Country Party, taken by the Conservatives in 2019, in which many people thought was a shock. I don't think it was. I think it was inevitable. What's interesting this time is, of all the Black Country Party candidates, Steve Edwards is the closest to a celebrity they've got.
And so you think he's going to knock John Martin out, who's a long-serving
I think if there is going to be any wow results, although I would suggest Briley Hill being going to Conservatives is probably one of those. If the Black Country Party are going to have any electoral success, it's in Brockmore and Penn's Net. I would be interested to see how well Steve does. As I say, he's got a very significant social media following. He's the architect of The Only Way is Dudley. As I say, in terms of celebrity politicians in Dudley, Les and Dave aside, he's the closest we've got to being that sort of celebrity. But the trouble is, most of the people who he's a celebrity to don't live in Brockmore and Penn's Net and therefore can't vote for him. But I'd be interested to see that, because I think his presence in that election born and bred in Brockmore and Pensnet, makes that outcome unpredictable. And then finally, I've got Wollaston and Stourbridge Town, which is where I was a councillor in 2012. Had I decided to stay in 2015, I would have been hounded out by a huge defeat, but I didn't stand, so I never lost. I'm undefeated. It has been exceptionally close. There's been, I think it was 2016, Conservatives took it with a majority of 2.
Yeah, from
And
Labour.
in 2019, it was a majority of 6. And I don't know how to predict that one. If things go to form, if you like, if you look at sort of the national politics, the national swing, the Conservatives will hold it probably quite comfortably. But it's an interesting one. But my view would be Briley Hill, Quarrybank and Dudley Wood, 2 Conservative gains. Wollaston and Stourbridge Town, a hold. Brockmore and Pensnet, to coin an Americanism, a toss-up. And now I'm going to throw in a couple of curveballs. Hilary Bills is the current deputy mayor. I am led to believe, as long as there was a clear Conservative majority and Hilary was re-elected, she would be the mayor for the next council year. I think that was a very good chance. Unfortunately, I believe that the Conservatives will take Halesoe North. And because I've seen Craig and Mitchell on our Facebook feed too, Cradley and Woollascote. If William Hill were taking bets, I'd put some money on the Conservatives winning that one as well. So I
Cradley and
think you are
Woollascote.
looking at a Cradley and Woollascote.
So you think the long-serving Labour councillor is gonna lose tonight?
Yes. I think it's a
Ian, I've written all of
possibility.
these down. So when we get the results in, I'm going to be testing your predictions.
So this is you got a 4-seat turnaround then.
So 1, 2, 3, yeah, four gains for the Conservative Party. I think that would be,
And potentially one for the Black Country Party.
yeah, that could go either way. I think the outcome of the result of the election in Dudley will be a fairly comfortable Conservative majority on Dudley Council.
Okay, Uncle Les, let's bring you in. Do you agree with that?
Can I just say that would be interesting, because if Ian's predictions are right, we will end up with a majority that equals the largest majority we've ever had on Dudley Council at 43, which is quite a staggering number. I'm not convinced about all of his predictions, but I think he's right there in the ballpark with all of them. And if that is the case, I think it will be quite a damaging event from the Labour Party's point of view in Dudley, because I recall David Corn saying many years ago that we have never come close to the kind of majorities that Labour can command in Dudley. So therefore, we can never be complacent. If we get beyond 43 seats on Dudley Council, we will be into uncharted territory. We've never been there before. And 43 would be, I think Patrick would probably not come down off the ceiling for about a fortnight. If you look at overall predictions, I think Ian's spot on in the areas he's targeted, the wards he's targeted in terms of shift. I'm slightly surprised by Halesoe North, but that's probably because my wife Karen was a councillor there for many years, and it was a rock solid Labour seat, all three, for all the time from, I think, its inception up until Karen became a councillor there. And no, sorry, we did have one councillor there a couple of times in previous elections, but after Karen got it, we took all of them, and until she moved away, we held at least one in Halesoe North. And I think it is possible, particularly because Stuart Henley, former UKIP, is standing, and Stuart was a very active councillor in that area, and he did have an enormous support base. I think it was just the loss of UKIP's national position that led to him losing when he did. So yeah, on Dudley, I'm pretty much with Ian on this. As far as the mayoralty is concerned, I would be really surprised if Andy Street didn't win with an increased majority. And off the back of that, I genuinely think Jai Singh Sohal could well become the next Police and Crime Commissioner. I genuinely think those two will go hand in hand. So my prediction is it's the best thing I ever did standing down from the council, because the Tories are going to take proper control again.
Are there any seats that you worry about losing at all?
The political instinct in me says Wollaston is a risk, because I can't remember when Wollaston hasn't been a marginal seat. It was a three-way marginal when the Liberals were in big numbers. And going back to when I first came onto the council, there were 7 Conservatives, 11 Liberal Democrats, and the rest were Labour. But since the Liberal Democrats faded away, it's been a two-way marginal every election I can remember. Brockmore and Pensnet, as you say, we took last time, I think. Yeah. And Briley Hill, that's always been on my list of people always hope we're going to do it. And the same with Quarry Bank, actually, because we do get down into single-digit numbers, but we rarely get that close that it's a proper fight. I think this year could be, and that's partly because I think there is a national factor here. I think the government is, I won't use the word popular, I think the government is satisfactory for the majority of people. And I think the opposition have been weakened by the Jeremy Corbyn episode, and I don't think Keir Starmer's cutting it now. So I think there is a national factor. I think it will have a big influence. We are a bellwether area in that sense, and consequently, I think we're going to see pretty much a clean sweep for Conservatives in Dudley Borough. Okay,
Les. Dave, your turn. Are you sort of agreeing, but before I ask you for thoughts of changes, so you sort of agreeing with Les perhaps that Keir Starmer isn't cutting it as leaders perhaps the Labour Party would have hoped, and perhaps that falling onto all the trauma with Corbyn beforehand, people are a bit frightened of voting for Labour, and certainly on national issues.
Well, I think as far as the national leadership is concerned, he didn't do Labour any favours having the massive fallout that they did. And I think it'd be nice to see if people just got behind a leader, to be quite honest, because when you continue to have this constant backbiting behind the scenes with supporters of a former leader, it doesn't help any party. And that would cut across the board, whatever political party you're in. As far as the local elections are concerned, I think it'll be much tighter than people are predicting. The one imponderable, of course, is Brockmore and Pensnet, because John Martin's up there. John's been doing quite a lot of work for a number of years and getting some good work done. And I know he's run a good campaign. Steve Edwards has run a campaign. I think he's community pubs and Derby and Joan clubs. To be quite honest, if people are going to fall for community pubs and Derby and Joan clubs, then they really need to look at what people are offering as a policy. But I think the presence of Steve and the votes that he'll get within Brockmore and Pensnet might hand the seat to the Tories.
Mm.
The other seats that Ian mentioned, I think they're all going to be very close. But having seen the campaign effort that our guys have put in, and the amount of time and effort that everybody in the back room has put in as well, I think Labour has run a better campaign than I've seen them run for many years.
Mm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if if all the predictions that we've just heard are sort of knocked on the head a little bit. We've got some candidates, to be quite honest.
Are you talking with heart or with head?
We're both, to be fair, because I've seen it firsthand, the graft that's gone in over several months, really. And you look at the candidates that have been chosen as well, and they are popular people. So it'd be nice to see some of them on the council to replace the old fossils like Les and myself. As far as the police commissioner and mayor's elections go, I think that's going to be along party lines, and I think Jason Sowell will get a bounce off Andy Street. I agree with that, but don't be surprised if that's very close as well.
Are you expecting some recounts tonight? You think it's going to be close?
I think there'll be recounts all through the night and all tomorrow.
You think it's going to be very close throughout?
I think so.
And a quick thought, obviously Sandwell across the border used to be completely red, but obviously now there's a few independents because of things that have happened. Do you think Labour are going to lose much over the border in Sandwell?
Well, I think there's self-inflicted wounds that they've got over there. It'll cause a little bit of disruption, but I think it'll be staunch red still.
Yeah, okay.
Too many egos in Sandwell. Egos don't win many votes, and I think there's a lot of people standing who think that they're well known enough and that they'll cut through. They won't. But what may happen again, and we saw this in 2019, is that where people are disaffected in any way, shape, or form, they will go elsewhere. And people in Sandwell were disaffected, which is why there are Conservative MPs in Sandwell.
And let's not forget that in Sandwell, if every seat went to Conservatives in this election, it would still be a 2/3 majority to Labour.
Labour, because of what's happened in the past, yeah. One last thought before we let you go. Boris has been in town during the course of the week, visiting Stourbridge Football Club, which for me came as a surprise, as much as anybody. Just your thoughts on the fact that I suppose that he was brought in, but also the fact that, you know, a football club for me should be what it is, a sporting club, rather than perhaps a political pawn to perhaps show off candidates and whatever. Just wondered what you guys' thoughts were.
First of all, I'm going to say, sorry, carry on, Dave.
No, go on, Ian. Go on.
I mean, personally, I think that has as much to do with security than anything else. It was a wide open space. It's flanked, I think, by rivers or canals on two parts of it. If you're bringing in at short notice the Prime Minister of the country into a town, personally, I think Stourbridge Football Club was probably the safest place to do it. Now that the sort of Cranages has gone.
Dave?
Yeah, I agree with Ian. I used to be, when I was a policeman, I used to be on the special escort group that used to escort politicians around and royalty and that, and the venues were always paramount. They had to be safe. So I think it's no more than that. I mean, what really upset me was when he flew in by helicopter. I'd spent 4 hours on the Warheath ACAC gun and he never flew over me. So there you go, that's life.
And Les, one last thought about Boris Johnson himself. You know, he comes across as this kind of, I guess, buffoon type person, but he's obviously very clever, and he's also at the moment very popular, particularly with the vaccination rollout, and you know, there'll be lots of Brexiteers still out there very much singing his praises. What do you think has worked for Boris, not just as Prime Minister, but I guess also as Mayor of London as well previously?
I think it's really simple, and us politicians get so bogged down in policy and how you communicate with the public. I think the one thing that stands out with Boris that I mean, I was not a supporter of Boris becoming leader until I went to the hustings meetings and saw him perform. And I went from being a very big supporter of Jeremy Hunt, not because I was a fan of his, but because of the contenders. I thought he was the most reliable and the most stable and the most classically political candidate. Having then seen the hustings and seen Boris perform, I realised why he was going to succeed. It's because he's human. He's got faults. He's got weaknesses. Every one of us have those things. And a lot of people who would never dream of voting Conservative. I even had people ringing me who only knew who I was because I stood in Dudley North in 2017, phoning me up saying, I hope you get Boris because he's like us. And he isn't. I mean, he isn't. He's one of the most privileged in this country. But what he is he's got fallibilities, he's got weaknesses, and people love him for that. And I think the criticisms that were levelled against Boris for coming to Stourbridge by helicopter and then all these Range Rovers and whatever, he's the Prime Minister of this country. Yes, Ian's right. He needs to have security around him. It's a massive coup if anything interferes with his day. It's a massive political factor. And so whilst I understand your point of view, Adam, sport should be away from politics, it doesn't mean politicians can't be like the rest of us and go and visit sport venues. And when he was welcomed there by the club management, I don't see why he shouldn't go there. I would have no problem with Keir Starmer going to Stourbridge Town Football Club either. They've got to mix with people where people go. And I was pleased to see Boris come to Stourbridge. Yes, it's probably a fillip for the party locally because so many people like Boris, even if they don't give a damn about the Conservative Party, they still like Boris, and it will influence their decision when they come to vote.
And will we see you riding out on one of the Boris bikes?
Yeah. you won't get me on one because I can ride a bike, but having bought one because I thought it'd be good for my health, I found after 2 or 3 visits to the main roads of Stourbridge, I didn't really want to do it anymore.
Can't think why. Gents, we'll call it quits there because it's midnight, and I want to let you disappear off into the land of slumber. If possible, we'd like to catch up with you in the morning, perhaps about 8-9 o'clock, if possible. Do that by phone and get your thoughts on the results from overnight. But for the moment, Dave Tyler, been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us, and do enjoy your retirement, and hopefully speak to you in the morning. Les Jones, again, enjoy your retirement and enjoy looking at the results coming in without the nerves of what's going to happen to your own seat. And we look forward to talking to you in the morning. And Ian, as always, pleasure. Thank you for your informative information. And we will talk to you on Saturday morning at about 10:30 to look back on the night that was and to look ahead to the results later in the day. Guys, thank you very much, and good night to all 3 of you. Yeah, thumbs up and waves don't really work on radio, but there you go.